my thing that was at 10:20 is canceled. So
recording.
Awesome,
great.
cool. Should we wait a few minutes or hop?
Yeah,
get into it?
let's wait a couple minutes because now
Yeah.
I have a bit more time after, like, to extend if we want. So.
Mhm.
Jonas,
Awesome.
hi. How are you?
Hello,
Oh,
Jonas, coming to you from the future.
yes,
Yeah.
love it.
Someone with the best username came in here, Thunder Biscuit. I love it.
Thunder Biscuit.
So how's the planning of the BTC Pay server Miami 21 party going?
So far it's really pink.
Okay.
It's kind of like who knows what's going on, but I think it'll be fun.
Yeah.
Me and Rockstar for sure. Anyone else who wants to come? Are you coming, Connor?
It's very touch and go for me, to be honest. It's going to be quite a last minute thing. I'd love to come, but our flat situation is it's not the best here in the UK. I'm currently doing a 10-day quarantine because I've just flown back from Mexico, and so we have this a light system, so green, amber, and red. If you've been to a country that's in the amber or red regions, when you come back, you have to quarantine for 10 days, and you have to do a coronavirus test on day 2 and 8, and you have to pay £200 for the pleasure of it as well. If you go to a country in the red zone, you have to quarantine in a government sanctioned hotel and pay £1,750 for the pleasure of it. So travel's a bit crazy right now, but maybe I hide out in Mexico for 10 days or something before flying into the US or something. But yeah, it's a bit difficult.
Stephen, I think you're muted. You're saying something?
Still muted.
Still can't hear you.
There we go.
You had 2 layers of mute on. You're saying if you went to Bitcoin 2021, then you would have to go, when you went back to the UK, you'd then have to quarantine for another 10 days?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Just gotten out of quarantine?
Not only quarantine, but paid to quarantine as well. Yeah, so not ideal, man. But there is a green list of countries that if you go to, you don't have to quarantine. And then amongst those countries are the South Sandwich Islands, Faroe Islands, no disrespect, like Iceland, Gibraltar, and they're not the most popular destinations for holidays, at least as a UK citizen. So I don't know, maybe I go to the South Sandwich Islands and hang out there for a bit and see what's going on over there.
It's kind of like money laundering, but it's people laundering.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even know how you'd get to the South Sandwich Island, to be honest. Like,
yeah,
but
Probably with the subway.
I don't know. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, we're 5 minutes in. Since Jamaal has a lot to present, how about we kind of kick it off? So, well, thanks everyone for coming. I'm not going to say very much here at all, but I was wondering, Jamaal, before you jump into your presentation, if you could start with a little bit of background about you and the project itself and kind of how you went about it. Because I feel like if we have a solid presentation here and question and answers and all of stuff, and we can record it, put it on YouTube, this might be a good thing to archive or document kind of your whole effort, which was quite massive, I think. So please.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So my presentation actually has some background in it, so I'm going to talk about most of that in the presentation, but I guess I can share a little bit of background on myself first. So I'm a designer and design researcher. That's sort of my profession. So this style of project of going into the ambiguous muck of trying to figure out what matters in the world to particular users is kind of what I do. And this particular project, I'm going to share my screen to sort of get into it. Is my screen being shared?
Yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
great. Let me. Okay. All right. It's funny because I can't see you all. I'm just staring at my deck. I'm not used to doing like this. Is there another way to share? Is there a way to share a window?
There might be a button at the bottom in that option panel where you can switch your layout. I'm not sure what it looks like to the presenter, but it might be there.
And if you click on the camera icon again, then we can see you like in a small window, like after you share your screen. We can see you in a small window in the corner.
I can't figure it out. It's okay. I will. I'll just deal with looking at my own screen and not seeing you all. But I will say, if you have questions, feel free to sort of pop in. I guess it'll just be an audio-only conversation for me. But why don't we get started? So this project sort of started with a conversation with Steve, actually, from Square Crypto around the wallet, around Bitcoin Core wallet. And the attempt to sort of answer like what kinds of people are currently using it, why, what are the key elements that make like a wallet bring more value to those types of people, what information is needed to navigate and download it, and why do people run nodes and what are their profiles. So there are sort of like broad general questions, partly because we don't really know anything about core wallet users. We don't really have any sense of magnitude of actual core wallet GUI usage. We have some sense of nodes, like the volume of nodes. I think there's something like 10K visible nodes typically on the network. But it's kind of a wash when it comes to data for the rest of this stuff. And so this project started with like trying to investigate, getting some answers to these questions with the hopes of that potentially fueling, product or design on core wallet or, someone forking it, who knows, but just sort of some sense of improvement, because it's a little, to some of us, it's weird that product that is supposed to be one of the cornerstones of Bitcoin, at least to some people. I would say there's a lot that don't think that as well, as what I learned. It just seems like it doesn't get much design effort or product effort, and it's kind of a pretty crappy product. Which I kind of want to ask actually before I want to see you all for a second. See if I can stop sharing my.
By the way, I could not see. I saw the whole video. I did not see your screen share this whole time.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know
now you're sharing. Okay, now you're not sharing.
Okay.
It's weird. It's like there's no indicator on the Jitsi screen for me if I'm sharing my screen or not. I'm not sharing my screen right now, right?
No.
Okay. Well, I want to ask you all first, maybe by like a thumbs up, like who's using Bitcoin Core Wallet GUI as their primary wallet? There's nobody. Okay. Who sent their last transaction using Core Wallet? Nobody. and so this is kind of like
there's Jonas. There's Jonas. Jonas to the thumbs up.
Don't forget Jonas.
Jonas, did you give a thumbs up?
Jonas,
I missed that. Sorry.
Yeah, I use Bitcoin Core
as your primary wallet, Bitcoin Core GUI.
Yeah. No, mostly the command line. I don't use the GUI that
Okay.
much.
So that is an important difference. That is an important difference. So we're gonna get into this. I'm gonna share my screen again. Sorry, I missed you, Jonas. Didn't want to make you feel left out there. Okay, I should be sharing my screen now, and let's go back to this. Okay,
looks good now.
Great. Okay, so this is just a quick overview of like the research I did. So I did 13 interviews, 4 BTC dev interviews, so a total of 17 interviews. I had 400 plus respondents in my survey. And these people that were in the interviews were over 9 countries. In the 400 respondents, there was people from many more countries, an order of magnitude more countries. There was also a survey that I helped Sheer Frank with, which had a bunch of other data that I think sort of corroborated what I had in my survey. And they led that survey, but I supported as well. The methodology toolkit in the interviews, obviously, ethnographic interviews. So we spent an hour and a half, which each of these participants sort of digging into how they see the world in Bitcoin, what's important to them, the tools they use, and their evolution over time. We had a bunch of sacrificial concepts, which are basically like, products or features or tools or services that we're not even suggesting that we build. They're actually just made to have a conversation. They're sacrificial, they're not precious, and they're to elicit conversation around attitudes or behaviors that people have. We did a digital card sort as well. We'd ask the question of like, if you were to switch wallets right now, put all of your funds, your primary wallet, what are the values you want in that wallet? And we would have people rank them. And then we did a survey. So I'm going to jump into what I call insights. So I've structured this deck around like 8 insights, and they're kind of like nuggets of information that I found during the project, which sort of like have a lot of can influence direction of like product or design. Some of them, there's different levels of obviousness to this sort of the one-line insight, but there's a lot of nuance as well. So I basically structured the deck around an insight, and then I have quotes from participants, and then I have some how might we questions to sort of provoke, thinking around, okay, how do we address this, or how do we move forward from here with design and product? And then I have some concepts, very like, almost like an icon to denote a concept, just so we have some sort of like tangible thing to talk about. So the first thing, which, the reason I was asking that question is Bitcoin Core Wallet is often quickly abandoned by new GUI users. And so, for the wallet GUI, for Moon Money is what I call it for Bitcoin, which is like, a new iteration of digital money. It should feel like a Tesla, but it often ends up feeling like an outdated Ford Fiesta. And newcomers are often surprised that the wallet is kind of unusable without downloading the entire blockchain. And a lot of them don't know what a node is or why it's doing that, or that they have to keep it open to make sure that it's syncing all the time so that they can continue to transact. And so these aren't like these are hurdles, of course, but there's an opportunity to give guidance or redirect people, because the amount of churn, like almost everyone that I spoke to, there's no one that is using Bitcoin Core GUI, period, that I spoke to. And there's a lot of people who have tried it and they leave very quickly. And it often ends up being sort of like that moment where someone who's made the leap from like Coinbase or, in some cases, Mt. Gox back in the day, they've made the leap to wanting to custody their coins, which often means that they've sort of taken on a self-sovereign ideology. I kind of like, those are sort of like words that I feel like are kind of loaded now, but like they've taken on the ideology of wanting to custody their own coins. And so they're willing to take on the work and the challenges of doing that. And this often is sort of a first failure point. It's sort of like, okay, I need to go somewhere else. And so these are all anonymized people. So these are all fake names. And I've basically taken like body photos from another project that had anonymous people and put them in here. So these are fake names and fake photos to protect people's identities, which was my guarantee for everyone that participated in the project. So John said, I accidentally ran a node when I first got into Bitcoin. My brother had an old laptop that had Linux. I downloaded Core from the website, ran it, ended up syncing the whole blockchain without realizing what the crap was going on. I just thought it was taking forever before I could start, so I just left it there. He ended up not even using it. Jared, who's a Core dev, said the reason why, every bull run, there's a massive spike in Core nodes that start running, and then it drops off, and it's just a bunch of newbies who are coming in and thinking that's where they should be starting. And then Kurt said there's nothing explained about this full node you're running, and it was downloading the data and spinning errors the entire history of the blockchain, and you couldn't really do anything until it was synced, and then finally once it was done you could receive. Which I'm not sure if that was accurate. I don't know. I don't know if you can receive. You might be able to receive before it's synced. I don't know for sure though. So how about we set expectations for people onboarding into Bitcoin Core? How about we better direct newcomers into solutions that benefit their needs? And how about we make BTC Core less burdensome to set up and easier to use for non-technical people? And I want to flag that like a lot of the people that I was interviewing for this project were people who, I filtered out people who were like, the best place to store Bitcoin is Coinbase or another custodial service. Because to use these types of tools, they're still quite raw, but you have to make the leap, you kind of have to own this belief system that you want to use Bitcoin in this particular way. And often there's a bunch of other beliefs that align with that. Either it's like, I believe in open source, or I think open source is important. And so these are not people who are primarily, trading a lot of different coins or using Coinbase as sort of their main wallet. These are people who have sort of made the leap to a whole slew of different solutions to store their coins. And so, we can redirect people to alternative products. We could have sort of like a quite vetted list that has maybe a way of explaining the different trade-offs, technical trade-offs. You can remove the node from core wallet, which is, I think, actually being done, or we could default to SPV mode, where people can, engage immediately instead of sort of being on the sidelines and waiting for things to sync up. So this very much, what I just said about the types of people that we interviewed for this project is very important with this to be something that's more potent than just the words themselves. The primary function of a wallet for most ardent Bitcoiners is saving and safeguarding value. And yes, that is to some degree obvious, but when you start thinking about how a wallet is designed and what it's designed to do, it's like, a wallet is kind of designed around transacting. And that is not what people are doing. Like almost everybody in this project is not really using, they're not actively using Bitcoin in a dynamic way, as in transacting. There are people there are entities who are doing that to some degree, like businesses and some individuals. But the large portion of people's funds and people who are using these types of tools are in some, what I would call like static users of Bitcoin, right? They are people who are most concerned and putting most of their effort and energy into safeguarding the value and savings. And you would design things, I think your product would be very different if you focused on creating a safe versus a wallet. And a lot of people have sort of built their own stack of a bunch of different tools to give them the assurance and the confidence that they need that their coins are safe. So this is sort of a breakdown of people that answered the survey. You can see there's like a ton of people who are using hardware wallets. And then there's, a lot of people who are on Casa, Coinbase, paper wallets. There's some that are using Core Wallet and Robinhood, Cash App, PayPal. So the primary function, and the reason I point that out, by the way, is like, there is like a paper wallet, Casa, hardware wallets. Those are that is more about 3/4 of the circle. And those are tools designed kind of not for transacting, right? So people are generally gravitating towards things that feel more like a safe than a wallet. Chris said, I'm not somebody who believes that one should be using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. I don't think it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, I've done so from time to time when there's no alternative. I'm a hodler, as they say. I stack the sats. I think it's just too early for transacting. And he actually is a wallet developer. I promised everyone not to be anonymous, so I can't list the wallet, but it is not the most popular wallet, but it is a multi-sig wallet that he set out to create because there just wasn't a good solution out there. And so like creating a multi-sig wallet, again, is about, it's entirely about creating a static mechanism for your Bitcoins. Kurt, what brought me into Bitcoin was I wanted to buy something from the Silk Road. I wanted MDMA. I chickened out of purchasing it, but I had this Bitcoin, and the more I learned about it, the more magical it felt. So I started to accumulate more, and after losing some on Mt. Gox, I started using a paper wallet, then eventually a Trezor to keep them safe. I don't really use Bitcoin aside from hodling it now. It would be nice if they gave you some words to write down as a backup instead of kind of having this digital backup. There's no way to back it up well. If you spin up Bitcoin Core Wallet on its own, there's no way to like have anything besides a digital backup, is what Frederick said. So again, that question of, you know, what makes people feel safe with their coins, and having just a digital key for a lot of people isn't good enough. Or sort of the dot, I think it's the .dat file or whatever for the wallet file. So how might we design BTC Core around primarily being a safe rather than a wallet, static versus dynamic? How might we create wallet support guidelines on how best to safeguard funds, and how about we enable new ways to back up BTC Core Wallet? Some of the possible concepts could be, you know, how does Bitcoin Core become a multi-sig coordinator that sort of like is the standard for how different tools interoperate, how different wallets interoperate, and enable you to easily sort of coordinate a multi-sig setup. How do you, like, could we have repeat seed tests if we have a proper, you know, seed in Core Wallet instead of a digital file? Can you like, you know, have a test for seeds or reminders occasionally so that people are, you know, checking on wherever they've hidden their seed, or making sure that they still have it, or testing it before they run away with it. And then for those who are transacting in Bitcoin, Core doesn't fulfill a lot of accounting, mobility, convertibility, and privacy needs. So a lot of people who are transacting in Bitcoin, you know, they're certainly sending Bitcoin, but it often relates to the fiat conversion rate, right? It's like people are paying for things often in the real world, and I don't have stats on the volume of purely just like BTC payments unrelated to the market price of a Bitcoin. But from all of my conversations, any transaction that was done was generally around a conversion rate. And Core has no way to feed current like prices in, or to record. If we don't even want to feed prices in because we think that's too scary, there's no way to like record fiat prices in there, to know like when I was paid how much that was worth, or when I paid what the conversion rate or how much the US dollar amount was of that. And then when people are spending, they like to have potentially a mobile phone wallet, or wallets that have privacy functionality baked in, so that when they do spend, you know, when they pay John for a hot dog, you know, John, who's potentially is another Bitcoiner, can't look back on the chain and say like, oh, it looks like you have 1,000 Bitcoin stash or 100 Bitcoin stash or whatever. Sort of obfuscate people from looking at the rest of their stash or their transactions. By the way, is there any questions or comments so far? I don't mind this being like a dynamic or sort of like an interactive presentation. No questions or comments. I can't see you all, so you have to peep up if you have questions. No?
It all makes sense to me.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So some of these insights, I think, are based on the assumption that Bitcoin Core should be improving. And I'm not saying that that's an unreasonable assumption. It just clearly the market has found ways around it. And so why invest in Core as opposed to continue to allow the market to build on top of the protocol?
That is a great question, and that is part of my question, right? So I'm not supposing that these features should necessarily be in Core. I'm sort of saying, like, you know, there are people who are obviously, I mean, it's pretty clear that people are finding solutions elsewhere, and the market has, you know, provided a lot of other solutions. And there are Core developers I spoke to who said that project, Bitcoin Core Wallet, let's kill it. Like, it doesn't need to exist. It's kind of a terrible product. I spoke to other Core developers who are like, you know, who grew up, you know, basically in that wallet, and they still use it, right? They were like part of the project from very early on. And so they only trust that wallet. But generally that is, you know, besides people who are sort of born into the wallet, everyone's using other solutions. So it is a great question. And the purpose of this, you know, was to sort of investigate like what's going on more deeply. And it's not necessarily saying like Bitcoin Core Wallet needs to improve. That is part of the question of this project. Like, do we need Bitcoin Core Wallet? What is the function of that code base? Should it just be, as you'll see maybe later on in this, is like, should it just be like a CLI-based RPC tool where it's like we design it specifically super well for developers to build on it and learn and like test things, right? It's like there's infinite ways that this project can go, and maybe it doesn't go any of the ways because we just don't care enough or we don't want to invest in it. But that's a great question.
Thanks.
Yeah. Can you all see me on video when I'm talking, by the way? Or is it just my screen?
No, you need to click on the camera icon again for the little pop-up window to show. That one, yeah.
Now you can see me?
Yep.
Yes.
Now we
Okay.
can see you.
Cool. Now it's not just audio for me, but it's only audio from you guys. Okay. Any other questions before I keep going? Okay, no questions.
Nope.
All right. Yeah, so I think I already explained this one. Yep. So we'll jump into the quotes. So Nathan
I think
said
you
I'm
need to share again, or
Video's frozen for me right now.
Yeah, same for me.
Oh, here it is. It
Oh,
just
there
came back.
okay, there you go.
Is it? Can you see my? I just went full screen again with the presentation.
No,
Can you
it's
see it full
frozen.
So
I think maybe I can't share my video while I'm doing this.
Yeah, all these problems started happening after you turned your video on.
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect.
Is it working now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Looks like Jitsy's got a bug. Okay, so Nathan said I'm using a hot wallet in addition to a cold card. It's for receiving donations with BTC Pay Server. It's kind of the BTC stash where I just keep it online. If I lose it or my keys, I'm hacked, I'll be fine. If it goes above whatever I'm comfortable with, that's above the amount of Bitcoin he wants in there, he will spend it on gift cards with Bitrefill after sending it to his Wasabi wallet. And sometimes if it's just too much money to spend on gift cards, he will send it to his hardware wallet, which is where he keeps his stash. Diego, who's a miner in Venezuela, an industrial miner in Venezuela, is saying that as a miner, you never know how much you actually make. Every day the price is changing. So a tool like a tool to calculate how much Bitcoin was at the moment that you make it is would help to know how much you've spent. Oh, that quote is messed up. I used a transcription service for that interview. The last one, Mark said, we used to run a Bitcoin Core wallet with our Electrum personal server, but it crashed quite often. It was a headache to maintain. It would take 3 hours just to restart things, and then you'd have to wait to scan 10,000 wallets. The worst was funds would get locked for days while waiting for a rescan. We switched back to BTC Pay, and it has all the recorded transactions in the Explorer, so it's much easier to use. And Mark has an online store that accepts Bitcoin for gift cards. So how might we enable people to record fiat amounts as they relate to Bitcoin transactions? How might we elevate the privacy tools people have and access to in Core Wallet? Simplified transactions and UTXO management can ease accounting challenges and enable quiet privacy preservation. So in Core Wallet, there's this label function, which is kind of like almost like a general tool that I think isn't great for most people that are trying to do some level of UTXO management. So the things that I heard that people were doing were avoiding dust attacks, which is, I didn't know about this. This is when someone sends a small amount of Bitcoin to your wallet so that they can track, where you spend money or where you send your Bitcoin in the future. People wanted to eliminate association with other UTXOs that they previously, other Bitcoins that they previously held, or they were holding funds for others like family members, or holding transactions that customers had sent that they needed to sort of hold while that Bitcoin wallet itself was active and they were still transacting with it. And this isn't really a great tool for sort of managing funds. And so Andrew, in particular on the left side, he holds Bitcoin for his family members, and he would love for that to just, kind of stay on its own without the stash mixing with his stash. And he would love for his wallet to sort of do that, manage that. And Andrew was paid with Bitcoin once, and he wanted to keep that separate from the rest of his coins. And he also was dust attacked. He said he received 50 sats that people were, trying to track his wallet, and he called it like toxic change. You want to like get that out of your wallet, like, keep that out of the rest of your sort of like transaction UTXOs. And then Mark, who's the guy that owns the Bitcoin gift card store online, was saying that sometimes a customer transaction will fail, not meaning that the Bitcoin hasn't come through, but they either like, the service that they were using calculated fees wrong, or so that the amount that arrived was less than, the retailer was expecting. And so they will need to freeze that UTXO in particular, while they're still potentially emptying that wallet to pay their vendors. And so how do we automatically flag, when things are likely to be dust attacks? Small transactions like that are, uncommon maybe, and could be flagged, or you could maybe make it so that it flags you. How do we create easy to use alternative means to have different accounts within one wallet that is seamless to use? So instead of labeling things, could you have like, your income wallet or your family's account? And how do you enable people to keep this metadata separate and encrypted with easy interoperability? Because that's one thing that came up in another one of the interviews, was like, it sucks that I can't really, like, I would love for this to be able to go between wallets and for me to keep this data safe. So I had mentioned account-based wallets. You can have rules for accounts where it's like, if you're being paid, you could set a rule where it's like, if it's below a certain amount, it goes into this like this pile of UTXOs. Or with an account-based wallet, you could generate addresses that sort of like keep things in like accounts that are just in your wallet and feel separate, and then exportable standard-based metadata. So this relates to the first question I asked. Developers are by far the primary active users of BTC Core Wallet, and not for the GUI. There is pretty much nobody I could find who is actively using the Core Wallet GUI, besides the one core dev I spoke to. Again, it's like out there in the ether, it's very hard to know like if there are other people, but my intuition, based on the variety, the like very extreme variety of people I spoke to, from I spoke to a person in Syria who is using Bitcoin to get paid, very small amounts, obviously, for his work. I spoke to several developers, some of whom have made work on BTC Pay Server, work on their own multi-sig sort of wallets. People who are non-technical, who sort of fell down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and use Casa. So there's such a variance of users, and like people all over the world responded to the survey, and I feel like the GUI is just a ghost town. But there's a lot of activity with developers who are using the core wallet, primarily the CLI, to run scripts, to test things, to push testnet transactions, sometimes complex operations, to like work with PSBTs. And so I think there's a big opportunity, in my opinion, to elevate the tools developers have access to, and what Bitcoin Core Wallet potentially is. This is what got me most excited about like the possibility of where this project could go, because it feels like it's something that the people who could potentially work on Core Wallet, are the people who are, could be excited about the stuff that they would be using and building, because it's stuff that would help them. So Jared, a core dev, was saying, I never use Bitcoin Core Wallet GUI. Most of my Core Wallet is usage is via other tools like Spectre, which is like also very common. Like, when I say like developers are the active users of BTC Core Wallet, I am excluding generally like integrations of Bitcoin Core Wallet in other products. I'm talking about sort of the native unit of Bitcoin Core Wallet, because it's certainly integrated into a lot of products that people are running, running nodes with. Jared talked about using the RPC command line if he's doing PSBT manipulation, but also never real funds. It's always for testnet development. And he's been playing around with more complex Bitcoin scripting stuff, running into issues where Bitcoin Core doesn't have support for many scripts yet. And then Chris uses Bitcoin Core Wallet like a high-powered tool where you have access to a lot of knobs and levers for complex operations, obviously via the command line. So the thing that I had referenced in the last call when I gave a preview of some of this research, I kind of talked about that old school 70s nuclear control room with all the buttons and graphs and levers and screens and stuff. That it feels like it's in some ways it has that complexity that obviously highly specialized people can access. And for most people, it's pretty intimidating and inaccessible. Frederick was saying it'd be great to have the CLI to derive addresses from an XPub or derive a seed or address from a seed. With the multi-sig, you want to cross-reference addresses from one wallet. It's also helpful to have a recovery setup, but with BTC Core, you have to have a rescan of the blockchain, so it's not super convenient. Having a CLI that talks to a local node and derives brute forces that and scans the blockchain is a needed tool. So how might we better serve developers learning BTC scripting with discoverability, shortcuts, recipes? How might we elevate the ease of testing and development with new data accessibility in the CLI? And how might we enable developers to easily build products on or in Core? And so, when I say develop products on or in Core, I mean like a modular wallet or a modular GUI where it's like, can we make this? And this may be, I am not a very software technical person. I'm a very different type of engineer. But could you have a wallet that is largely like a super safe, secure code base that has, a CLI and RPC that people can build on, so people can build like their own GUIs or like new functionality, or a wallet sort of like that's a wallet GUI that is from the get-go designed to be modular. So like, if someone wants a privacy preserving element like Wasabi, they could plop it in. Or someone wants to run a node, they could plop that in. Because there's so much variance in how people are building these stacks, but it's not such high variance that there wouldn't be like, 5 archetypical things that people would, plug and play. Could we build a fully featured GUI CLI wall where there's actually like almost like a heads-up display in the CLI where you can actually have data displayed in a much more intuitive way than the CLI currently has, and make that even customizable or easier for developers to use, and then scripts and recipes and shortcuts for developers. People largely run. I'm going to pause for a second, ask if there's any questions again so far.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
You say a fully featured GUI CLI sort of. How would that look to be improved? We do have the RPC console and the GUI already. So what would it look like to improve that? I think you're kind of limited in it being a GUI application. You can't do all the things that you could scripting in the terminal and other things like that. So how would you improve upon that?
So I kind of think of it as like these are very loose concepts as well. But you could have like an axis, like a, highly detailed and like almost like graphics made with like axis text in a term, like a, a terminal window or like whatever tool a developer is using, and have that sort of like be designed to sort of be GUI like, where you can have, it's kind of like everything is in that CLI window. So you're not hopping between windows, but there's also like a way to have data displayed or sort of like things that are most commonly used displayed in what feels more like a GUI, but is like maybe made up of axis text.
Yeah, and you could use like keyboard shortcuts as well. Like for instance, Vim is something that's quite like feature rich, and you can have like trees and like just like subfolders and all that, and you can navigate through it with your keyboard. So, yeah.
Does that answer your question?
I guess so. I guess the main idea here is to revamp the RPC console that we have in the GUI to be more feature rich than the way it is now.
Yeah, entirely purpose built for developers, and that's like that would like the GUI for BTC Core, in my opinion, should be like a core that serves, or a GUI that serves developers. It doesn't have to be a GUI as in like, an actual graphical user interface. It can be like a pseudo graphical user interface, as in like, you can use AxiText to make things look like an image, or like, make numbers that are bigger than just a text number by using many different characters. Like there's ways to build a GUI creatively that could potentially be useful right in that console.
Yeah, that's something to explore.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on, unless there's any other questions, again, it's audio only for me, so feel free to peep up.
Keep going.
Okay, so people largely run nodes for non-transaction based reasons, for goodwill and to learn and experiment, and on separate hardware. So the prevailing narrative for running a node is like to preserve your safety, or your privacy, I should say, which makes sense. And it obviously makes sense, and a lot of us have some element of that in the nodes that run. But the reality is, from the data, it seems like most people are running it for experimentation, learning, and for goodwill. For some people, running a node kind of feels like a magical experience, like people's first Bitcoin transaction. I had people, sort of wonder at the amazement of their contribution to keeping Bitcoin alive, and that if they had a node running, Bitcoin can't be killed. And so here's some data really quick before we jump into some quotes. Like these are of the people who have run nodes that responded to the survey. The majority are running a node for non-transaction based reasons. Their personal transactions, right? Not security around their transactions, to support and strengthen the network and experiment and learn. And then here's another chart showing the same data, but split out from most technical people, as in like professional software developers, hackers on the red, to very non-technical people who are on the left. And you can see that the proportion of like people who are running a node to elevate their security and privacy is much higher on the professional side than the ratio for like the non-technical side. Just some interesting data. So John said, I don't run my node for privacy. My mind doesn't go there. Bitcoin cannot die as long as I'm alive, because as long as I'm running my node, I'm still going to keep Bitcoin chain running. I think that's amazing. It's like, wow, I have the ability to support and keep the Bitcoin network alive and make sure that the 21 million hard cap is kept. Andrew was saying, it's weird, I wouldn't tell anyone to download the core wallet. Like, why would you do that? That's sort of absurd. It's kind of a strange place we're in. It doesn't need to be that way. Like, it doesn't make sense to have someone give up 500 gigs on their computer to be able to use the wallet. But on like running a node, he runs many nodes, and he usually recommends it on separate hardware. And then Kurt said, I purchased my Nodl just for my own education so I could see how a node works and start to figure out if I want one in my own setup. So how might we make contributions that node operators make to the BTC network more tangible? How might we make it easier for newcomers to immediately make the leap to running a hardware node? And how might we supercharge the learning and exploration that many desire? Open source products elevate trust. And this is, I'm particularly talking about the products people are using in this, in the Bitcoin world, and can exacerbate the fear of experiencing technical challenges with no support system. So all of these folks who are sort of like using self-custody tools, the ones that are using things that are a little bit less easy to use than a Trezor or a Ledger, are often stacking together open source products. And there's a lot of anxiety around like, having a technical error where you have no support, because these are sort of like free open source products where you kind of don't expect someone to be there. And, forcing someone to use the command line to like fix something or get data for non-technical users is kind of sending people to an unfamiliar place with a language they don't understand. And when your funds are on the line, the idea of even going to the command line or having to use it, the fear can be pretty intense. So Mark said, I'm not a coder, but it's open source and a bunch of people have been using it. I hope that somebody has taken the time to auto it. I know that doesn't mean it's happened, but a lot of people use it, so it seems more likely. So this is, again, speaking to that that element of open source. So we did a survey, and open source often came close to the top of people's preferences, and it's because a lot of the, even technical users want that, but what was most, I would say, important for non-technical users was that they kind of feel like they don't have the ability to see under the hood, and so they rely on other people, highly rely on other people to look under the hood for them. Kurt said I could never get my Noddle set up. I had problems with it straight from the beginning, and it was like the interface was the most intimidating thing. I ended up in their Telegram with questions, and it's like they were speaking another language I couldn't understand. They asked for an RPC password. It almost seemed like intentionally made to be as intimidating as possible, and I'm not a technical person. One of the other things he said was it kind of made him feel like he was almost offending them by being in this Telegram chat. And then Alex was saying when I was deciding when I wanted to switch to multisig, I didn't trust myself to use Electrum, but I did trust that Electrum could be used safely. And so Casa is basically helping you use Electrum multisig, but putting a pretty facade over it and guiding you through every step of the process to make sure you don't mess it up. And if you do mess it up, you have someone to help you. So how might we create open support systems for open source Bitcoin products and tools that feel accessible? How might we create grading systems maybe for how technical certain setups will be, or like the comfort people need to set things up? And how might we support developers of open source tools to design them for entirely non-technical experiences that feel more like consumer software? And this last one, I wasn't quite sure how to frame it, but it came up enough times in the interviews that I think it's important to bring up. And I don't have very much insight into how big of a problem this is or how to tackle it, of course, but the lack of standards came up a bunch of times with the developers I spoke to, and they felt like it was holding them back as developers and holding back great UX. They spend an inordinate amount of time ensuring their wallets are interoperable with other wallets. And they want to make sure that in Bitcoin, when you're working with open source tools, that anyone can leave a wallet and hop to another wallet, but it's not quite as easy as it should be. So Chris was saying we need to move towards a standards-based approach. We need to leave the Maverick world where people go off and do their own thing. Some people aren't really into that, like Cold Card or Samurai. If you ask them to make a BIP, they'll just say no. But as a community, we don't really move forward. If a user wants to move to another platform where something happens, then you're kind of isolated. He was sort of talking about being able to hop between wallet services and how there's maybe different standards between how people are interpreting XPubs or even PSBTs. One of the things I've worked hard on is the ability to import, export a wide variety of wallet formats. So a Trezor, Cold Card, Electrum, Spectre. Ultimately, we shouldn't have different formats for every single vendor. I've been working with the AirGap community to develop a sort of animated QR code standard to transmit PSBTs. And then Frederick was saying interoperability is the biggest issue with UX. I don't know if I'm cynical, but sometimes you get the feeling that people want to lock people in and make it more difficult to leave their ecosystem to go to a different one. I should be able to recover if one app is compromised. I should be able to go to another wallet seamlessly. So when you have what you have right now is just all these different standards of importing wallets and exporting wallets. How might we balance developing rigorous standards while enabling the openness and leaderlessness of Bitcoin? And how might we elevate interoperability across the ecosystem to enable developers to focus on products and technology? So these are the nuggets that I shared with you all. BTC Core Wallet is often quickly abandoned by new GUI users. The primary function of a wallet for most ardent Bitcoiners is saving and safeguarding value. For those transacting in Bitcoin, Core doesn't fulfill accounting, mobility, convertibility, and privacy needs. Simplified transactions or UTXO management can, ease the accounting challenges and enable quiet privacy preservation, but it's not quite there in Core Wallet. Developers are the primary active users of Bitcoin Core Wallet and not for the GUI. People largely run nodes for non-transaction based reasons. Open source products elevate trust, but can exacerbate the feelings of the fears around experiencing technical challenges with no support, and the lack of standard, infrastructure may be holding back developers of great UX. So, Bitcoin is for everyone, but who should Bitcoin Core Wallet be designed for? And if we're going to put effort into it, I think we're going to have to answer this question, and it's not going to be designing for everyone. I think we need to choose where that effort goes. And in my opinion, based on, where I think it's possible to put resources that, into this. It feels like the resources are around developers who are building kind of for themselves a lot of times. And my sense is that is the direction I think Bitcoin Core wallet should go. But I am one person and this is one project. I would love to hear all of your thoughts.
Thank you, Jamaal, for sharing that research. I think it was useful in so many ways. I'm a node user. I like the idea, but I also fall into the category of I use it as a learning experience. And when you get there, maybe it's not so much of a learning experience. Now, I'm not a developer, and using Bitcoin Core without the GUI is scary for me because I don't fall into that. I wonder.
Can I ask how are you running your node? If I can.
I'm running.
Oh,
it just cut out for me.
Yep.
Oh no! Alexa,
where are you?
The node is taking up too much resources.
Yeah. You gotta close Core Wallet. Just kidding.
Cool. Anybody else want to ask something or say something while we wait for Alexa?
I think that was a great work, Jamaal. And I mean, I kind of, feel the same way about, Bitcoin Core. I think it should be regarded as a developer tool. I mean, very quickly in the days of the World Wide Web as a protocol, like not very few people were actually using Tim Berners-Lee's, like reference implementation of a browser. Very quickly moved to Mosaic and all these other things. And, the rest is history. So, I mean, I think that, especially, and that's not to say that there's no place for designers in Bitcoin Core, but one way of approaching it might be like trying to make it so that if a new person to Bitcoin lands on the Bitcoin Core homepage, they're, like if they find themselves on this repository, they learn very quickly that this is like a developer resource. Like when people don't land on, I don't think they don't land on the Android development kit homepage and suddenly think they should start downloading debugging libraries and all these kinds of things. So I think there's definitely a place for designers to, improve the experience for, developers and documentation and just making it clear to new Bitcoin users that this is a developer tool and not something else. So I have to leave the call now, but I just wanted to say thank you. That was a really, really great research.
Thank you.
To follow up, Johns, go ahead.
I was just saying it's a bit tricky slope or line to walk across because where it is maybe more suited for the developer types, we do maybe still want to have a wallet that really stands by like the principles of Bitcoin and in case like everyone else becomes like bad actors and like at least we have this one thing that that we know is accessible to everyone and it can like for sure run the entire
totally
network.
And to like my response to that, Johns, is to get somewhere good with the GUI and like the GUI can we could just maybe never touch the GUI and it could be that fallback, right? Like it's going to exist, but like if we want to make something that's like a reference fallback, like I kind of feel like it needs to be forked. I'm not saying fork Bitcoin, obviously, but like I feel like that project is dead. There's so much like it feels like it's not a priority and it feels like there's just I don't know. It feels like starting from scratch just feels like a way more potent place to start for starting a GUI that is intended for a very certain person versus now that if we're going to design the other one for developers, it's like, okay, now we can divide them and like design them very differently. And so that's my feeling is like maybe it needs to be forked. In fact, that is what one of the core developers, I didn't have any quotes from him because I was a little worried it would be too incriminating, but I had one core developer basically tell me like the wallet project needs to be killed. It's like a terrible product and like what people should do if they want to make a wallet is fork it, because this project isn't going anywhere. That was his opinion. So
I have a question on that. Well, first of all, thanks for the presentation. I have a bunch of notes here, but not speaking from what a wallet is right now and the sense of how hard it is to change anything about it, which is totally there, is my question would be, if this core development team also works on a wallet, like what can the market, what will the market not satisfy? What type of wallet can this team build that nobody else will build? That's really important for Bitcoin to exist. Like, what can only happen in this space that doesn't happen anywhere else?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question.
Be?
I think that's an excellent question. And my take is sort of building that, like, again, I'm one person, and this is just my intuition based on the data that I've the conversations I've had in this project, is like building that code base that is, made for developers to build on, and like designing entirely around like a tool for them to build products on. To me, that feels very like, almost like a super important and potent part of Bitcoin. Like, how do we make it so that it's easier for people to build on and learn with and test, and like enable them to make whatever products they want to make on some super secure, vetted, open source code base. That's my view. I don't know. I'd love to hear what you think, Christoph.
Well, this is a little bit like what the Bitcoin Dev Kit is trying to do, BDK.
Yeah.
Because I don't know the exact details, but that just makes me think of it. Well, I just have a couple of other thoughts too. So the thing is, let's say you take Bitcoin Core away, the GUI. So the one thing I got from your presentation was that there's a search for a legitimate wallet. There's a search, and on the Bitcoin Core .org website, it says, this wallet is a direct descendant of the original Bitcoin software client released by Satoshi Nakamoto after he published the famous Bitcoin white paper. This is about as legitimate as you can get, right? This says to me, like, I can trust this. I don't, I believe. Then if you take the Bitcoin Core GUI away, because I feel like this drives a lot of people there, that and building a node, if you take that away, where do you direct the people who search for that? Because there's clearly a need there.
What is this? People are searching for a legitimate wallet.
Correct. So the people that end up using Bitcoin Core GUI, they're like, I want this legitimate thing that I can trust. Then if the GUI is not there, then where do you send them? And is there something that exists?
I guess I would want to unpack what that means. So like, what does legitimate mean from their point of view? Like, what is building that trust? Is it that it's open source? Is it that it's a direct descendant? Is it that it's worked on by actual like core devs, right? That it's, I would want to unpack that, because I am not sure that having like a hereditary line to like the original GUI is necessarily the thing. I personally don't think that is the thing that's pulling people in. I think there's other measures of that, and clearly people are churning out. So like, despite its legitimacy, it's illegitimate for their purposes, right? It's not meeting their goals. And so it may be like, how do you take those elements of legitimacy, whatever that means, and make sure that you keep them and like spike them, and like make sure that it's like that's directed in a way that doesn't squander it, because it feels like it's squandering it.
Yeah.
There's another possibility that we may not have considered, and I'm sorry, I kind of lost signal there.
Yeah, we were worried about you there.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm not a developer, and I don't fall into that category, and yet I kind of believe in Bitcoin Core like many other people do, or the people that know. And what I'm thinking is that Bitcoin Core is a thing that you join once you know more about Bitcoin. It's not for beginners. It's when you want to dive in and learn about it. What if, aside from looking at all of these developer aspects, which are important in order to stack on top of Bitcoin Core, what if it was an opportunity to educate people about Bitcoin? Because what is it that you do once you download Core? you want to know Bitcoin. You want 100%. To know how it works, kind of a little bit more of it. And maybe there's a way that it could become more of an educational tool.
100%. So I completely agree. And that's sort of one of the how might we questions after the first insight was around like, how do we, better set expectations, or how do you how do you educate people who are coming into this? Because those are people who are coming into Bitcoin Core have moved past just relying on a custodial online service. They are now looking for something to custody their coins. And so there's a mindset there potentially, right, for a lot of people that is different. And so how do you direct that? Where do you take people? And I did look at other projects' wallets. I did, I downloaded, I think it was Decred's wallet, to just see like how other core wallets are designed. And they have a lot of, I noticed that they have a lot of like explainer functionality. I actually found it kind of like interesting how it's almost like they have like a little helpers along the way that explain what's happening, and make it a lot easier to navigate. It's like, I don't have fresh eyes, obviously can navigate Bitcoin Core Wallet, so it's hard for me to measure if that was a good way of doing it. But I thought it was interesting because they kind of have some of that content that you're alluding to baked in. But you could even take it further, and which may be what you're saying, Alexa, of like, how do you, if people are running nodes to learn an experiment, how do you like elevate that? And how do you make it so there's like really interesting content around running a node, or like we visualize data of like what your node is doing. And there's ways to sort of like inquire, or like, build your understanding of how these mechanisms work in a way that's kind of like, it's kind of like, how do you turn it into like almost like an observational science lab, right? How do you make that a cool thing to see?
Hey, Jamaal, Daniel here. I'd love to keep digging on the points that Christoph brought up. If we say that one track is that the GUI gets sort of discontinued, or another very similar track actually is if it kind of just stagnates, or it's not moving forward, and that's kind of the status quo today. So the Bitcoin.org website is one of the top hits when people search for Bitcoin. And I don't think the legitimacy necessarily just comes from the lineage and the heritage of the GUI. It might also be a lot to do with that it's on the site. It's on the Bitcoin website. And I think a big problem, a big issue to deal with if it were to kind of be decommissioned is like, just like Christoph was hinting on, it's like, where should we send
people?
And I think even just sort of removing it from being promoted from that website is a big issue, right? Because it is there, and I can understand it's an extremely difficult open source political discussion to like define which ones you should promote instead. So I think that's a lot where the kind of thorny issue lies.
That's where hell lives.
Yeah, exactly. But but hell kind of lives in status quo as well, because this GUI is going to kind of fall further and further back from consumer expectations. So doing nothing is also bad. So I was interested in like it's obviously too big an issue for you to solve, but like if you start saying, hey, maybe we should stop investing here, then that's an issue that will come up very, very quickly.
No, I hear you. It's kind of a pickle, because it feels like we're squandering a lot of opportunity to sort of like, create that journey that builds people's self-sufficiency and confidence in like, using Bitcoin tools. Like people end up in the core wallet GUI and abandon it. And I'm not sure what to do because it is political. Like, what do you put on there instead? Or is it that you just explicitly like, call it a developer tool for now? Because that seems to be where people are finding utility in it, and the rest of the website is just like about Bitcoin. But because I feel like I mean, I try to stay out of the muck of Bitcoin politics to some degree, but it just feels like, putting anything on there, like, here's a link to Cold Card, like, that, again, that's where hell is. It's just so political.
So I have a suggestion here. So because one of the problems I see is, if you look at my background here, is this bitcoincore.org. What is this? What is this? What does it do? Like, what is this website for? What am I?
Who's it for?
What is it doing? I don't know.
Yeah.
I would change it into something like that, and I posted that in Slack a while back. It's the toolbox for builders. You get this desktop wallets where you can try all this stuff out. Here's a command line, run your scripts, and you have this sweet API to build your own stuff. Very straightforward, like no visual change. It's just text, and these 3 images are different. Like, it tells you what it should be. However, what would be more interesting is, and I had to think about this, because you had this slide where you had like 3 different versions of it, and that made me think about it. Something we also discussed after these 2 hackathons we participated in, which was Fulmo Lightning and then MIT Bitcoin Expo, and we talked about the idea of a designathon or a design week. And this would be excellent for, let's say we have 2 weeks, Bitcoin design weeks. And maybe one or if the challenges is, hey, pick one of these concepts for Bitcoin Core and just come up with like what that thing could be like. Because then we don't have to figure it out in a conversation here. We could have a bunch of different designers tackle on, because design is such a great planning tool. You can visualize stuff. You can make it look so real before anybody's ever coded anything. And you can get feedback on it. You can discuss it. You have a clickable prototype. And that would allow for a visualization of some of those different directions. And then, everybody, designers, developers, users, you could get those people, maybe some of the people you interviewed, and say like, hey, if Bitcoin Core was this, is this what would you use it, or whatnot. So I don't know, maybe we could turn this into a just cool community exploration. I mean, I would have fun doing this for sure. I don't know how
I like the idea of sort of like, messaging around Bitcoin Core as a toolbox for builders to, like, hint a bit more that it's like not necessarily just a wallet for someone who just wants a wallet.
But if you put this up on the website, people will be all kinds of discussions. So, but we could have this longer conversation based on some design explorations and other conversations, and maybe people come up with some super cool concepts about future Bitcoin UX or so. And I don't know, could be interesting. So get some consensus mechanisms rolling.
This looks awesome. Yeah, this looks really great.
Jamaal, where would we be able to see maybe this presentation, or if there's other materials from your research?
Christoph and I were going to talk about that of like offline, of how we're going to make sure the content lives somewhere. So the intention is probably for it to live on GitHub. That's what Christoph has sort of said. It would be great to have it on there. So I mean, I would love to have it on there. I would love anyone to have access to this this presentation. The question is just like what format. This is in a Keynote, so like if I could export just like a PDF or images, and they can just stack on a GitHub page, that's fine with me.
There's some of these points that you brought up that I'm like super interested in, and you've done a ton of research on them, and I'm pretty sure have gone into like a bit more depth than just the presentation. There's a few topics. I think of course something with labeling and UTXO management. One of them, of course. Second time I brought it up. But and there's some other concepts there that I would really like to see how deep you went into those things.
I mean, we can talk a little? I mean, right now, or we can find another time if you want to chat like one-on-one, John. I'm open to either.
No, cool, no problem. Yeah, well, I guess more so is about like the access to the research and stuff, because like I'm still just a person, and there's other people I'm sure who would.
Yeah. So the research in its form that you've kind of seen it is pretty much as raw as I would be willing to like publicly let things go. But I'm happy to talk about, what else is sort of under the hood.
Okay.
Yeah, we can grab some time anytime. You and I have chatted many times on video. We can set up another call.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, we could do it offline then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good conversation to see if there are any other snippets or so that could be used to inform some of the parts of the design guide. Like here's something we recommend, and here's research to back it up, as Jamaal has found by interviewing XYZ or so, or maybe some quotes that could be used or so.
Yeah, even things like like the dust attacks and the replaced by RBF stuff.
Yeah.
I have a question about the specific feature that you mentioned, Jamaal. It's the repeat seeds testing.
Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit more
it
what
would
it's
just
about?
be like if your wallet would just test that your seed occasionally, like give me the 15th word or something like that to make sure that you still can track it down. If you can't track it down, it's like your wallet is in a good state right now, so you could send the funds out. It's just like ways to elevate people's confidence and also make sure that they're using the wallet in a safe way, because these are people who are using these tools as a safe, not a wallet. It's typically to them not a small amount of money, and it's kind of supposed to be a static tool that doesn't get used much. So it's like people aren't thinking about it a lot and like going to check their key. So if you can play that role of making sure that they're still on top of it, that can be a way to elevate that assurance.
That's awesome. Congratulations. This is really, really cool. I never thought about that.
Thunderbiscuit has messaged he or she would like to speak.
Hi guys.
Hello.
My first Bitcoin design meeting, so happy to be here.
Great, welcome.
Great, thanks. Cheers. Great presentation. I wanted to ask if it came up if anybody was, I know that something that's being worked on, or at least discussed a lot, is the idea to separate eventually the wallet from the core repo. And I was wondering if that came up, because to me it feels like this would be it. That's the do or die moment. Once you separate the repo, either that thing can fly on its own, and then it can accept a lot more PRs, and then you have contributors starting to pour in and eventually make something out of it. Or that's the moment where it needs to compete against all the other wallets on its own merit. It's not part of the Bitcoin core repo anymore, and that's the day it dies, basically. But that moment is such a cornerstone moment that you're either, Anyway, that's it.
That's a really good question. That's and a really good point. Yeah, I certainly knew about that they're pulling out the P2P portion of the wallet, the node. But I didn't really think about the implication of, how will it impact, I guess, where that wallet in particular sits in the market, and the likelihood that people would use it. Because now it's like, if it's separated, if you're downloading it, it's like you specifically want that GUI. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Can I hop in on that? So the GUI itself has been broken out into a different repository, and that was designed to. A lot of Bitcoin Core developers were not all that concerned with sort of how the GUI was developing. So it was one to sort of separate some of the signal from the noise, but also it was to try to encourage people and developers with a different skill set, and also invite designers and sort of a different part of the ecosystem to work on the GUI. So I don't think, Harold was on this call. I'm sure you've talked to Habasto, but I don't think if you sort of take if you did a survey of people working on Bitcoin Core regularly, I don't know if anybody would be particularly proud of sort of what the GUI has evolved into. And so breaking that out made sense. The wallet is a little bit more entangled. And I guess historically, the reason why it's not all that easy to separate all these pieces is that Satoshi created pretty much Bitcoin in one file. So everything was entwined, and it's, as for the most part, Bitcoin, when it was first released, was a proof of concept. And if you know anything about prototyping, you don't take your proof of concept and launch it into production and then build $1 trillion economy on top of it. But that's what happened. So we're sort of stuck with this legacy of single process running all these different these different components. And the wallet definitely falls into that. So there's been work to separate those into multi-process and therefore be able to break out into other repos. But it's not all that straightforward. It's a pretty big change.
Yeah.
And the interface isn't all that clean. So there have been people who have tried to build directly on top of Bitcoin Core. The Orange project, I can put that in the chat. So if you're familiar with this project, which didn't, I don't think it's gone particularly far, but this was a chance. This was someone who was building on a wallet, trying to use the public interfaces that were available, and even some of the private interfaces that were available, and it was really hard. Meaning that the project is not in a place where people can build their own wallets on top of it. If those interfaces could be cleaned up, I think the wallet could be broken out, and also the market could then build really cool things on top of Bitcoin Core.
I think there was also another project like this, like a fork of the Bitcoin Core GUI.
And I don't know. I'm not familiar.
Okay. Try to find out.
I mean, yeah, I'd love to see it.
I think there's some talk about migrating to QML and stuff like that to have more flexibility on the design. But even with that, it has a lot of drawbacks with dependency, like what the dependency graph turns into, versus Qt widgets and whatnot.
So I'm kind of curious about something because I think when you pay attention to a project regularly for a very long time, you kind of get a sense for where it wants to go, kind of what the natural current is in a way. That could be through observing decisions or conversations or so, and things kind of crystallize in a way. Now, I'm just not familiar enough with the project to be able to have a sense for that. But I'm just kind of curious if there is if there are hunches like that where it feels like this is the most natural way that this could go, or here's something where there's a lot of hesitation that would just not work at all. Because it's kind of easy to form opinions, but I guess kind of where's the consensus pointing towards, if there is anything?
Yeah.
Some
question.
Are you talking about core developers and sort of where they would like it to go, or are you talking about users? Like, what's the?
Well, right now it seems like the developers are driving this primarily, and if this does not seem to be like a user-driven or user research-driven project at the moment.
Right.
I don't know if it ever was, right? I don't think it ever was. Is that right?
Yeah, which is fine, I guess, right? It's not the question, but I was just curious if among the people that care about the project right now, because they're the ones who matter, right? Because they're the ones who think it's important, who want to push it forward, they put energy into it right now. If amongst those groups of people, if there's a kind of a sense, even if it's not a strong sense, but there's kind of a sense of where where it should go.
Yeah. I think to say that it wasn't user driven at any point would be like a bit unfair. It perhaps like stagnated, but you know, if it was the first wallet out, the only wallet out, like a visual wallet, and that's what kickstarted this $1 trillion industry, right? Which is like people, downloading the software, like running it, and it didn't have as many features and RPC and all those kind of things. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure like feedback was coming in there. I saw some old discussions about like some marketplace and stuff that was once inside of the Bitcoin QT. And that got ripped out eventually because they're like, we need to simplify this. And that's kind of like out of the scope. So I think there was definitely a time for that. And the question is like, at this point, has it stagnated? And how do we move forward with things?
Jamaal, I'm sorry I interrupted. Jonas, if you want to reply to that, my point is a little bit separate.
Yeah, I guess again, I don't speak for Bitcoin Core, so obviously with that caveat. So at this, in terms of the nodes on the network, of the 10,000 nodes that are taking incoming connections, 99% of them run Bitcoin Core. So there is a sort of very strong signal coming from what people use that software for. On top of that, for example, you can compile Bitcoin Core without any wallet, and obviously no GUI. And anyone who is running a business, for the most part, is doing that. They are running their own wallet or their own custom way to keep track of transactions for their business. But they still need to run a node, and the gold standard continues to be Bitcoin Core in terms of the actual node. So breaking that out does make logical sense. It's just that intertwined piece that I sort of referred to that prevents that. And it is such delicate work that people would have to have an enormous amount of patience in order to be able to do that. There is one guy that has been doing that for a really long time. His name is Russ. He's been working on this multi-process project, which is allowing Bitcoin to run multi-process, which again cleans up those interfaces and pulls things out. So from a technical standpoint, there are reasons to not sort of rip everything out because it's scary to do it. There's a lot riding on it now, and it just wasn't designed to sort of morph into what it's turned into, of this Frankenstein of lots of things sort of bolted together. That said, I do think that from a Bitcoin Core perspective, if you ask devs, simpler is better, and therefore, like this move out, with the GUI moving outside of the Bitcoin Core repo, like I think that is it is a test case of what is it like to run the project with multiple repos. So the wallet does seem like the next logical piece to be pulled out, but there's still quite a bit of work to do in order to get there. Yeah. And then in terms of features going forward, like as Thunder Biscuit said, like it is maybe a do or die moment, but the GUI continues to limp on, even though no one's using it and it's in this other repo. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's exactly what will happen. When you can go back to the IRC logs when Marco discussed pulling out this GUI repo, and there was like a very informal survey of who was at that meeting of who uses the GUI, and it's like 4 or 5 people say I use the GUI for XYZ purpose, and therefore it can't die. So whether I think what's going to be, I don't know.
I think what's going to be interesting though is that if we even have like number of downloads data, I think that will be such a clear signal because there isn't really a signal on like magnitude of usage for the GUI, and I think that would be like alone just kind of an interesting data point to have now. Now that it's separated, it's like, okay, now it's like I know how many people are to some degree interested in that versus other things.
Yeah. So the binaries, you get the whole binary when you unless you're compiling and you're sort of compiling it separately. That data is they'll be commingled.
Oh, so we wouldn't be able to tell.
No, not really. You could offer a binary. You could probably do it so that you could offer a binary without the GUI, which would be, an apples to apples. Click on this if you want the whole package, and maybe there's even incentive to not take the GUI because it's not as big. So the next release, you could maybe suggest like we do twice the number of binaries, but like that's work, and there's I don't know. It without tracking, which is pretty antithetical to the whole point of this, it's going to be really hard to get that data.
Yeah.
I'm always wondering. To me, this does not feel like a technical problem. Like figuring out this direction of what it should be, what it not should be. You don't have to touch any code in order to figure that out and to clarify that. For me, it's just like I said earlier, the website doesn't even tell me what this thing is or what it does, and I think that's why people end up using it, because there are no clear expectations. They project their expectations on it, and then of course they get disappointed because it didn't match their whatever they had in mind, and then you get these responses that you've had in your interviews. And I think a lot of the UI problems, like bootstrapping, or Spectre just had this new wallet set up where you could download, a 5 gigabyte download, and you're up and running. You can have SPV. You can have all this stuff, like guide people through these steps. Those are all kind of solved UX problems. That could all be implemented. It's not. There's no innovation that has to happen on the UX side to make things more usable. But maybe if there's clarity, I feel like that's a design superpower in a way. You can visualize things for other people where words sometimes and arguments are not enough. You can just show them what it would be like if you take that road. So I do feel like maybe as designers we don't have to figure it out, but we can present some possible futures, which then allow, like if let's say we design 3 different concepts out with clickable prototypes or so, and we say, hey people, here are these 3 concepts, and the 4th concept is kill it. How many people go for kill it after trying out all these other ones, right? So I think it'd be interesting, and sometimes you have to show people like, here's what it could be, and then they're like, oh yeah, let's get it. This is worth investing my time in because I can see it, and the other person can see it, and we see the same thing, and we can gather around that. So I'm kind of interested in that's what my interest would be, forward-looking in a way, and trying to help maybe present some options that could, I don't know, create some dynamic that could move things in different ways, and then code could follow. Can't hear you, Jones.
It sounds like Bitcoin Design Week.
Yeah, I'm just trying to shill that.
No. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and if we can have some topics for people to get, like we have a lot more people in the community now. If we can engage them and have like some set topics that we can get them to contribute to, I think it'd be a good idea. A bit more experimenting.
Jamaal, I'm also curious if let's say like you've gone through this the last 6 months or so, what you do next? What would be if this was your project or whatever it is, like what would you do? What do you think makes sense?
I mean, often what I am designing for in these types of more strategic projects, and this is a very loose strategic project. This wasn't like, a company hiring me saying we want to move into this industry and we're like, we're thinking about these things and this is what we offer. It's kind of like, this was like kind of a project where it was like, should this exist? Like, how do we even find out who's using this, if at all? So it was a little like less strategic, but typically what I'm getting at is I'm typically designing decision points right? Here are your options, company. These are very different directions. Choose one and we'll prototype it and like figure out how do we actually like make that one a really good option, because there's like, you know, option A has like still infinite possibilities for design. So like it would basically be at this point, it's like, if I'm to think about this project, it's like, how do we design as a community? How do we figure out the decision as a community on what the future of the wallet is? Like, do we want it, like, is the GUI worth like building on? Is it something we want to build on? Or are we going to choose the like building developer tooling? Because there's still a need for design in that direction, right? It's like, even if it's entirely CLI based, it's like we can design a killer dev tool. So like the question for me as a designer at this point is, how do we pull, like, who are the community members and people that need to be at the decision table? How do you design the decision-making system in this context? Because it's like loose. It's not, you know, a product manager, a CEO, and like a VP beside me sort of prioritizing things. It's like, it's a community, it's open source. And so that's the question for me, which is like, how do you make a decision, and then how do you allocate resources in this context, which I don't have a good answer for, but like a decision needs to be made and there needs to be resources to make that decision come to life.
I think there's two decisions that need to be made. One is investing in developer tooling, which I think sounds great, and I think you'll find pretty broad support for. And the other is killing the GUI, which is more controversial, and you'll also find support for it, but you may find some holdouts as well.
Yeah.
So separating those two, I think, is worthwhile as you sort of think about your strategy.
For sure. Yeah.
Because presenting them as a binary,
they're almost different communities too, to some degree. Of like, you know, it's like I wouldn't be pulling in, like, to make developer tools a priority to some degree. It's like, I don't think you need to pull in a broader community to some degree for that, as you would if you were like killing the GUI.
Right. But I would say that you might be able to accomplish the both goals by appealing to the few people that are working on the GUI with the idea that they could be reinvesting their efforts in the developer tools. So if, for example, you know, Harold was on this call, he's deeply involved in the GUI. If someone like that were to change their course of the things that they spend their time on to work on developer tooling, well, you know, there's one resource moved from here to here, which again shows priorities. I'd be happy to help you sort of think about that and maybe like move forward on something actionable. If that's
yeah, I think that could actually be cool to like, because so I have to admit, one of my fears doing this project was like, is this going to be useful to anyone? Will anyone use this data? And because I don't have a particular client in this project where it's like, I know that if my client hires me, like, they're going to fire me if it's not going to be useful, and they're likely to implement it. So my question for this is like, how do we make this like have decisions that come from it? Because ultimately that's what I'm designing for, is like, I'm trying to give data with some intuition on where we should be going.
Yeah, there are no. I mean, this is Bitcoin. There are no decision makers.
Totally, exactly.
Obviously,
I mean, that's
Taproot would have gone a very different direction if there was.
Totally. Yeah, that's the beauty and challenge.
But I wanted to follow, like, use the word. Sorry, Alexa, just real quick before, because it was right on something that you used the term "make a decision," but the idea is like a decision should form through conversations and all kinds of stuff, right?
Exactly.
And killing the GUI is, I don't know if that's the right question to ask. That's a very binary life or death type of thing. Totally. It's like the emperor, you know, thumbs up or thumbs down. But you know, like, the question is like, what's the future of this thing? Like, right, where should it go?
Yeah. To some degree, Christoph, I am in the kill it or not kill it camp, because if you're not going to kill it, that means you have to have like a point of view on what you're going to do with it. Like, to some degree, maybe you don't. Maybe it's just like, we don't kill it and it still lives. But I feel like that binary decision, it kind of feels like we're at that point with the level of investment, and it's kind of a measure of, do people care about this enough, and do they want to invest in it more? So I feel like I am a little closer to that being potentially the right provocative question.
Yeah.
I
Please go ahead, Alexa.
I don't think it's an either or.
Mm.
And the reason why I think of it is because I'm outside. I'm not coming from a developer's point of view. And I think that Bitcoin Core is sort of a gate for which Bitcoiners for which people may learn more about Bitcoin. I think that there could be a site that could really use some constant work on the development side, so it could offer more tools for developers.
Mm.
But I think if we remove the GUI and the entire concept of it, then we'd be losing an opportunity for those people that arrive at Bitcoin Core wanting to learn more. So I don't know what the path forward would be.
I guess my response, though, Alexa, just if I can respond to that first part, is like, I don't think people are getting that, though. That's the problem. I don't think people are getting the learning from the product. They're churning out and finding it elsewhere.
They're not.
So the question of like, to me, the question of should we kill it or not, I'm not saying that should be the question, or we should certainly make that the question we pose, but it's like the reason I think that's a potent question is because, we can have all these grand ideas about it being a lightweight SPV wallet that is ultralight and can work in low bandwidth environments and somewhere as challenging as Venezuela, at least as it was a few years ago, or a learning tool. Like, we can have all these visions, but the reality is it's none of those things, and there are no plans for it to be any of those things, and it keeps sort of declining in its relevance and its usability to some degree.
But that doesn't mean that it could not be part of its future, or that people are already arriving at it. So it feels to me like if you kill it, then you lose a door that could help people.
Yeah,
I think you can redirect people, though.
Look, I completely agree with you that it's not there, that there may not be a team that's working on it. But I think that's the reason why we talk about these things, because there may not be one, but there could be one day.
There are people that are working on it, just to be clear. There is still effort being put into it. And it is, in fact, as I onboard developers, a safe place for people to learn about Bitcoin Core. So if you are new to working on the project, there's two really easy places to start. Tests. No long-time developer is ever going to complain about adding test coverage or cleaning up tests. And the GUI, which is not a scary place. It's like a few friendly people working on this thing, but it's sort of this it's literally relegated at this point, but it's this relegated different area.
Yeah.
And so I think the idea of opening it up so that the market, again, like this is Bitcoin, the market should decide, right? So if we can open it up so anyone can build on Bitcoin Core, then either the GUI as in its current state will morph into something that's relevant, or someone will create something better in its place. And creating the interface, the option for whoever wants to take if you want to be the keeper of the flame of the original GUI that Satoshi put out there, it's all yours, and you get to continue the vision. Or do you start from scratch and build something that is better and can replace it?
Yeah, I think you're both right. And I stand corrected, Jonas, as well. Like, I don't want to, no intention of downplaying, Sam Dobson and crew's work on Core Wallet GUI. Just, I think what I should have said and is more accurate is it feels like it's progress has petered out, or like the pace of change.
Well, the wallet is a little bit, there's a little bit of a nit that I just want to clarify. There's a difference between the wallet and the GUI. The GUI of the interface is different in that the wallet continues to be relevant. For example, in Taproot, there are no wallets that have Taproot integration except Bitcoin Core. And that had to be built before the release. And so if you're looking for a reference implementation on how a wallet handled Taproot, there is no other game in town. And in that way, it remains relevant, just like PSBTs and other sort of like bleeding edge features which make their way into the protocol, but other wallets have had no incentive to create because it doesn't exist until it's released. So in that way, the wallet itself remains relevant. The GUI, I think, is a different can of worms, and so that's sort of that. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah, but maybe that is that unique spot for the GUI too, to showcase how some of these features could be
really cool.
become user facing before they were out there in the wild. And that's kind of with this design here in my background. I was trying to find a way to embrace what this is right now and what purpose it's serving. Like, it's this fantastic toolbox of different things that you can use in different ways. And if I land on the website and I see that, my expectations will be very different if I download it and start using it. I will not expect it to be, it's not pretending to be a super highly polished wallet. I'm not expecting it to be, but I'm expecting to learn. Like Alexa, this tells me here, using this, if I use this software, I can learn about Bitcoin. I can experiment with it.
Yeah.
And I will see the cutting edge features that are even maybe just maturing at this moment. So I think, this is one of the things that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes you don't have to write new code. You just have to present things in the right way, kind of capture what it is and communicate that clearly to maybe clarify the perception. And if this could also be a thing where the developers who work on the wallet, they can sigh a bit of relief. We're like, okay, we do not need to worry about mainstream users, grandmas and whatnot. We can design this, we can develop this for ourselves, because we're those builders, we're the ones who want to try out all these features. So it's okay if we don't make everything super user friendly. We're going to add this feature in here because people like us builders, us hobbyists, we care about those, and we're going to make it this way. Maybe that helps too.
Yeah, I need to jump, but I appreciate you all coming and the ensuing conversation. This has been really awesome for me to sort of hear and reflect with everyone. And I'd love to follow up with Jonas, with you, Johns with you, Christoph with you, about the various things that we sort of talked about, to make Christoph to make this public, Johns to follow up on your questions, and Jonas to sort of like maybe collaborate on how we could make this a useful gathering point for making a community decision somehow.
Design Exploration Week, here we go. Yeah, thank you, Jamaal.
Quite selected. Maybe I think there's overlap with the stuff that I would like to discuss with you and Chris, and what Christoph would like to discuss. So perhaps we can schedule something together.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great.
So what are you going to do next, Jamaal?
This is I'm actually
you don't have to say
gears.
It if you don't
No, I'll say it. I am strongly considering going to a software boot camp for 6 months and like not working for 6 months. Partly because I think we're getting to the point where you don't